Looking for 100, 100. Do I hear 20, 20?
20!
I got 20, 20 now, 30, 30, 30. Sold.
It's 5:45 in the morning, still dark outside. A February frost is sitting on the windshields of pickup trucks parked outside the Riverside Cafe in Meade County, South Dakota. Inside, the coffee is already brewed. Stay with me until the end. Before we begin, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. The same corner table, the same cracked vinyl seats, the same 13 men who've been gathering here every Thursday morning for going on 11 years. Farmers, every one of them. Men who know the smell of diesel before sunrise, who can read. A sky the way other people read a newspaper. They've buried fathers here in this county. Some of them have sons coming up behind them. This land isn't just property to them. It's everything. March 3rd, 1976. Today there's a guest. His name is Tom Aldridge, regional sales manager for Miller's John Deere dealership out of Sioux Falls. He's in his mid-40s, pressed khakis, brown leather shoes that have never seen mud. He drove 2 hours to be here this morning, and he brought a briefcase full of brochures, a folder full of numbers, and a smile that hasn't left his face since he walked through the door. Tom waits until everyone's gotten their coffee. He does it on purpose, lets the room settle, lets these men feel comfortable. Then he sets his cup down and he looks around the table, really looks like a preacher checking his congregation, and he says, "Gentlemen, I'm not here to waste your time. I'm here because 1976 is going to be the most important year for American agriculture in a generation, and I want to make sure you're positioned to take advantage of it." A few of the farmers glance at each other, some curious, some skeptical. But they listen because that's what polite men do. Tom opens the folder. Grain prices are climbing, he tells them. Export markets opening up. The government encouraging production. He talks about the Soviet grain deal, about how American corn and soybeans are moving across the ocean in record amounts. He talks about the future, like he's already been there and bought a postcard. Then he says the line that's going to cost 12 men everything. The farmers who capitalize now, who upgrade their equipment now, they're going to set themselves up for decades of success. And the farmers who are still running equipment from the 1960s. He paused and shook his head. They're going to fall behind. He spreads the brochures across the table. New John Deere tractors, the 4430, the 4630, the massive monstrous 8630, turbocharged engines, air-conditioned cabs, more horsepower than most of these men have ever sat behind. Beautiful machines, if you don't think about what they cost. And Tom knows exactly what they cost. That's the whole point. "Now, I know what you're thinking," he says. "These are expensive machines. You can't afford them, Ord. But here's what you need to understand. You can't afford not to upgrade." He pulls out another set of papers, financial projections, charts, graphs showing how increased productivity would pay for the equipment over time, how the boom would last, how this wasn't 1950 anymore. One of the farmers, an older man named Warren Peterson, 58 years old, been farming since before some of these other men were born, pushes back a little. Says most of them are running tractors that are already paid for, says taking on debt means gambling that prices stay high long enough to pay it off. Tom smiles. Doesn't miss a beat. Warren, that's exactly the old thinking that's going to leave. Farmers behind. Nobody likes being told they're thinking old, not in a room full of proud men. Tom works the table for another 20 minutes. Then he stands up, leaves his business card in front of each man, thanks them for their time, and walks out. 13 farmers sit there in silence. Then they start talking. By the end of breakfast, 8 of them have agreed to visit the dealership that week. 4 more say they'll think about it. And there is one man, one quiet man at the end of the table, who says nothing at all. Just drinks his coffee, listens, watches. His name is Earl Hutchinson, 53 years old, 640 acres, 2 tractors, both bought used, both paid off in cash years ago, a 1963 John Deere 4010 and a 1967 4020. Not pretty machines, not modern, but his. After the meeting breaks up, one of the other farmers, a younger man named Dale Coffey, always eager, always moving, catches Earl in the parking lot. The frost is still on the trucks. Their breath hangs in the cold air. "You're not even going to go look at them?" Dale asks. Earl shakes his head. "Don't need to." But what if Tom's right? What if this really is a once-in-a-generation opportunity? Earl looks at his friend for a long moment. "Dale," he says, "I've been farming for 30 years, and the one thing I've learned is this. When somebody's working real hard to sell you something, it's usually because the deal is better for them than it is for you." Dale laughs, shakes his head. "You're too cautious, Earl. That's always been your problem. You'll still be running those old clunkers when the rest of us are retiring rich." Earl looks at his boots, then back at his friend. "Maybe," he says. "Or maybe I'll still be farming when the rest of you are working in town because you lost your land." Dale shakes his head and walks away. Earl Hutchinson drives home, never calls the dealership, never goes to look at the new equipment, never signs his name to a single loan document. That decision, that quiet, stubborn, almost boring decision, is going to save his life. Within 3 weeks of that Thursday morning breakfast, 12 of the 13 farmers visit Miller's John. Dear. What happens next? We'll take everything from them, slowly at first, then all at once. Dale Coffey trades his paid-off 1965 tractor for a brand-new 1976 4430. $34,000. He finances $29,000. Monthly payment, $512. Warren Peterson, the same man who pushed back in the cafe, ends up buying 2. Tom convinces him that the bigger 4630 is an investment in the future. $42,000. Finances $38,000. Monthly payment $660. A farmer named Roy Stanton goes biggest of all. Trades 2 older machines for a massive 8630. Tom tells him with a tractor that size, he could double his operation in 3 years. $68,000. Finances $62,000. Monthly payment over $1,000 a month. One by one, 11 more farmers make their trades. By June of 1976, 12 men have signed their names to loan documents they can't yet understand will destroy them. Total financed by this group of 12 farmers, $487,000. Combined monthly payment leaving. Those 12 farms every single month, over $8,000 every month. Good year or bad, rain or drought, high prices or low, that number doesn't care. It just arrives. The only farmer not paying it is Earl Hutchinson. He goes home to his 1963 tractor and his 1967 tractor and his 640 acres. Keeps his head down, keeps farming the way he's always farmed, conservatively, carefully, owing nothing. To nobody. The other farmers think he made a mistake. A few of them say it to his face. Earl just smiles and keeps farming. He has no idea yet just how right he is. 1977 was a good year. You need to understand that. 1977 was a good year because that's the cruelest thing about a trap. The beginning of it doesn't feel like a trap at all. Grain prices held. Yields were decent. The 12 farmers with new equipment felt vindicated. They covered more ground, faster. They talked about it at the Thursday morning coffee meetings, about efficiency, about expansion, about how Tom Aldridge had been right after all. Dale Coffey made his payments with money to spare. Roy Stanton, with his massive 8630, rented additional acres from a retiring neighbor and grew his operation. Warren Peterson bought his wife a new refrigerator for the first time in 15 years and felt like a man finally moving in the right direction. Earl Hutchinson farmed the same 640 acres he'd always farmed, made less gross income than the men, with bigger operations. But his costs were lower, no payments, no additional land rent. He netted about what he'd always netted. At the Thursday coffee meetings, he listened while the others talked about the boom, said nothing. 78 was another decent year. The payments kept coming, but so did the income. The 12 farmers were holding their own. Some of them were even, starting to relax. Then 1979 arrived and brought something nobody in that cafe had planned for. The OPEC oil embargo. Diesel fuel prices didn't just rise, they doubled almost overnight. And those beautiful new turbocharged John Deere tractors, the ones that could cover more ground, move faster, work harder, they drank fuel like nothing these farmers had ever owned before. Suddenly the cost of running the equipment Tom had called an investment was eating deep into margins that were never that wide to begin with. Dale Coffey had to take out an operating loan just to plant his crop. First time in his life he'd ever done that. It made him sick to his stomach, but he got through the season, told himself it was temporary. Earl Hutchinson, running older tractors that used less fuel to begin with, barely noticed the increase. His operation was small enough, lean enough, that the spike in input costs barely registered. He said nothing about it at the Thursday meeting, just drank his coffee. 1980 brought drought to parts of South Dakota, not everywhere, not biblical, but enough to cut yields by 20 to 30% in the hardest hit areas. 3 of the 12 farmers missed equipment payments that year, had to restructure loans, pile new debt on top of old debt just to cover the shortfall. Earl had a down year too, but with no payments to make, a down year just meant a lean year. He tightened his belt, kept farming. And then 1981 came. If you know anything about American farm history, you know what 1981 means. If you don't, you're about to understand why 12 families lost everything they had. The Federal Reserve, fighting runaway inflation, pushed interest rates to heights this country had never seen. The prime rate hit 20%. Farm loans that had been originated at 9 or 10% got refinanced, or in some cases called, at 15, 16, even 18%. Think about what that means. Dale Coffey's payment of $512 a month, the one he'd been managing barely through the fuel spikes and the drought. It jumped. Past $600, past $700. Headed toward $800 a month for a tractor he'd already been paying on for 5 years. Warren Peterson's payment went from $660 to $900. And Warren, who'd taken out an operating loan to survive. The drought year was now paying interest on interest. Roy Stanton's situation was the worst. His monthly payment on the 8630, already over $1,000, climbed past $1,400. At the exact same time, grain prices began to fall. The boom Tom Aldridge had promised would last for decades. It lasted 5 years. Export markets dried up. The Soviet grain deal that had driven prices skyward fell apart over geopolitical tensions. The government changed policies. The bottom dropped out of corn and soybean prices faster than any of these farmers thought possible. Roy Stanton was the first to go under. In the fall of 1982, Roy Stanton's farm went to auction. Everything. The land his father had broken ground on in 1947. The house he'd been born in. The equipment, including the massive 8630 tractor he'd bought for $68,000 6 years earlier, sold at auction for $26,000. Roy still owed $43,000 on it after the sale. He walked away from everything he'd ever had and still owed money. Earl Hutchinson drove to that auction, stood in the back of the crowd, watched it happen, watched Roy's implement shed, emptied out one piece at a time. Watched strangers walk through Roy's house. Watched Roy's wife standing at the edge of the yard, arms folded, face turned away from the road. He drove home without saying a word to anybody. Dale Coffey held on through. 1982, stopped taking a salary. Lived off what little savings he had, made his payments. But in the spring of 1983, he couldn't afford to plant. Took out an operating loan at 18% interest just to buy seed. When the crop came in below break-even that fall, Dale sat down at his kitchen table with a pad of paper and a pencil and did the math 3 times, hoping the numbers would change. They didn't. His farm sold in February of 1984, 420 acres that had been in his family since 1921. The buyer paid cash, paid 60 cents on the dollar. Picked it up like a bargain because it was one. Warren Peterson made it to 1985. Then his bank called his loan, said they were tightening credit requirements, said they wanted full payment or they'd foreclose. Warren didn't have it. Couldn't get it. Couldn't borrow it. lost the farm in March of that year, one by one. Farm by farm. Of the 12 farmers who bought new equipment in 1976, by the end of 1986, only 3 still owned any land at all. And all 3 had sold off substantial acreage just to stay alive. Not thriving, not farming the way they'd planned. Just alive, 9 families gone, foreclosed, auctioned off. Generations of work. Fathers and grandfathers who'd broken prairie sod with horses, who'd survived the Dust Bowl and 2 world wars and the Depression, wiped out in less than a decade because of a man with a briefcase and a smile who spent one Thursday morning over coffee selling them something they couldn't afford to say yes to. Tom Aldridge retired in 1988, moved to Arizona. By all accounts did very well for himself with the commissions from all those 1976 trade-ups. He never lost a single acre of land. He never had any to lose. Earl Hutchinson kept farming, kept his 640 acres, kept his old tractors, picked up a eBay, used replacement in the mid-80s when his 4010 finally gave out, paid cash for it, kept driving the same worn-out truck, kept drinking coffee at a table that kept getting emptier. One morning in the spring of 1987, only 4 farmers showed, up to the Thursday meeting. Used to be 13, now 4. Warren Peterson was one of them. He'd lost most of his land, but managed to hold on to 40 acres and the house. Was working part-time at the county co-op to make ends meet. He sat down across from Earl, and for a long moment just looked at him. "You were right," Warren said. His voice was quiet. "That day in the parking lot, you were right." Earl didn't say anything. What was there to say? "Tom told us we'd regret not upgrading," Warren continued, "that we'd fall behind, that we'd miss our chance. He was wrong. We're the ones who regret it, and you're the ones still farming." Earl took a sip of his coffee. "I'm sorry, Warren," he said. "I truly am. You're a good farmer. This shouldn't have happened to you." "No," Warren said. "It shouldn't have, but it did. Because we listened to a salesman instead of listening to ourselves." Outside the window, the morning light was coming up grey and cold over Meade County. The parking lot was nearly empty. The cafe felt smaller than it used to. Earl Hutchinson looked out at the fields beyond the road. His fields. Still his. He didn't say it out loud. He wasn't that kind of man. But he thought it. The goal was never to get rich. The goal was to still be here. Time moves differently on a farm. In a city, years stack on top of each other. Buildings go up, neighborhoods change, whole blocks get torn down and rebuilt. But on a farm, years are measured in seasons. Chanting and harvest, frost and thaw. The same fields, the same equipment shed, the same gravel road out to the highway, year after year after year. Earl Hutchinson was still farming in 1995, 72 years old, still walking his fields in the morning. Still keeping his own books in a ledger he bought at the hardware store. Still driving a truck with 200,000 miles on it because it ran fine and he saw no reason to change what was working. His son James had come back to the farm a few years earlier after a decade working in Rapid City. He wanted to learn it. Wanted to take it over eventually. Some mornings they'd walk the fields together before sunrise, the way Earl's own father had walked them with him decades before. One morning, James asked the question that had been sitting in his chest for years. "Dad, why didn't you ever expand? When land was cheap in the 80s, when you had the cash, you could have bought some of those foreclosed farms for nothing. You could have grown this operation into something big." Earl was quiet for a long time, watching the light change over the wheat. "I could have," he said finally. "But buying more land meant taking on debt. And after watching what happened to our neighbors, I swore I would never owe money on this place again. Not for land, not for equipment, not for anything." "But you could have made so much more money." Earl nodded slowly. "Maybe. Or maybe I'd have lost it all just the same, just with more acres involved." "James," he said, turning to look at his son, "the goal of farming isn't to make the most money. The goal is to still be here when the storms pass. And there's always another storm coming." James nodded. He was young enough to still be thinking about upside. old enough to understand what his father meant. "When you take over," Earl said, "you do it however you see fit. It'll be your farm. You'll make your own decisions. But if you want what I've learned in 50 years of getting up before sunrise and putting seeds in the ground, here it is." He held up one finger. "Own what you have. Don't owe what you use. And never take advice from someone who profits when you go into debt." James has never forgotten those 3 sentences. Not once. Not in 30 years. Earl Hutchinson retired in 2004 at the age of 81. Signed the farm over to James, who still runs it today, 640 acres. Same land Earl bought in 1956, back when a man could still do that on a careful savings. The operation has been modernized some. James runs equipment from the 90s and early 2000s. Bought, used, paid for in cash. The philosophy hasn't changed. No debt, conservative growth, survival over expansion. James has had people come to him over the years, lenders, equipment dealers, ag consultants with glossy brochures and financial projections, telling him the same things Tom Aldridge told those 13 farmers in 1976, that this is the moment, that the window is open, that the farmers who act now will be set up for decades. James always listens politely, asks a few questions, thanks them for their time. Then he goes back to what he was doing. A few years ago, someone writing a book about the 1980s farm crisis in South Dakota tracked down Earl. Then, in his late 80s, still sharp, still living, in the small house on the farm he'd never lost, and asked him about that Thursday morning in March of 1976. About Tom Aldridge and the 12 farmers and the decision Earl made in a cold parking lot. The interviewer asked, "Do you remember? What convinced you to say no when everyone else said yes?" Earl thought about it for a long time. Long enough that the interviewer wondered if he'd heard the question. Then he said, "It wasn't any one thing. It was just a feeling. Tom was really eager to get those men into those tractors. Real eager. And in my experience, when somebody's that eager to sell you something, it's usually because the deal is better for them than it is for you." The interviewer asked if Earl had known at the time that he was making the right call. Earl shook his head. "No. For the first couple of years, honestly, I thought I might have made a mistake. All those other men seemed to be doing fine, growing, expanding, looking successful. It wasn't until things started falling apart that I understood I'd been right." "How many of those 13 men are still farming their original land today?" Earl was quiet. "Just me," he said. "Of the 12 who upgraded, 9 lost their farms completely in the 80s. 3 survived, but sold off most of their acreage to stay afloat. None of them still farm. Most of them are gone now." "And the dealer? Tom Aldridge? He retired in 1988, moved to Arizona. Heard he did really well for himself with all those commissions. He never lost a single thing he owned." There was a long silence in the room. Then Earl looked out the window at the fields his son was already out walking, and he said something. The interviewer included word for word in the book, those 12 farmers were good men, good farmers, hard workers. They made one mistake. They confused growth with success. They thought bigger meant better. They thought the man with the new equipment and the expanding operation was winning, and they paid for that mistake with everything they'd built. I stayed small, stayed lean, stayed debt-free, and I'm still here. That's not because I was smarter than they were. It's because I was more afraid of losing what I had than I was excited about getting something bigger. Today, the Riverside Cafe still exists in Meade County, but there's no Thursday morning farmers meeting anymore. Hasn't been in over 20 years. There aren't enough independent farmers left in the county to fill a table. Of the 13 men who sat down together on that March morning in 1976, Earl Hutchinson is the only one still alive. He's in his late 90s now, living in the same small house on the farm his son operates. He doesn't walk the fields much anymore. But some mornings, James says, he'll come out onto the porch before sunrise and just stand there looking out at the land, the way he's done his whole life, the land that's still his, the land that never went to auction, never got picked up for 60 cents on the dollar, never passed to strangers. In a shed on the property, maintained and preserved, sits the 1967 John Deere 4020 that Earl was farming in 1976 when Tom Aldridge tried to convince him to trade up. That tractor, bought used for $6,800 in 1968, paid off in 1970, outlasted every single piece of equipment any of those 12 other farmers bought that year. It's still there, still functional. A monument to one man's refusal to follow a crowd walking straight off a cliff. So, here's what I want you to sit with before you close this video. Right now, today, someone is telling you that you need to upgrade, that you need to expand, that if you don't act now, you'll be left behind, that this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity and the window won't stay open forever. Maybe it's a car dealer. Maybe it's a bank. Maybe it's someone selling you a course or a program or a system that promises to change everything if you just say yes today. They've got charts. They've got projections. They've got a smile that makes you feel like you're already missing out just by sitting still. Tom Aldridge had all of that, and 12 good men said yes to him. 9 of them lost everything. 3 held on by selling off pieces of what they'd spent their lives building. 1 man said no, kept what he had, owed nothing, and he's the only one who still has anything to show for a lifetime of work. The dealer made his commissions and retired to Arizona. He never lost a thing. He was never going to lose a thing. The risk was never his. The risk was always theirs. That's the thing nobody tells you when someone's trying really hard to sell you something. The person doing the selling almost never shares in your downside. They take their cut when you say yes, and they're gone before the interest rates spike, or the prices crash, or the drought comes. You're the one who has to live with the decision. You're the one who has to make the payment when everything goes wrong. You're the one standing in the parking lot at your own auction, watching strangers walk through your house. Earl Hutchinson understood something that 12 smart, hard-working, decent men failed to understand. Survival is not a passive outcome. It's an active choice you make, over and over, by refusing to risk what you can't afford to lose. He wasn't smarter than those 12 men. He wasn't a better farmer. He just measured success differently. They measured success by how much they were growing. He measured it by whether he'd still be there next year, and next year came, and the year after that. And 60 years later, James Hutchinson is walking those same fields at sunrise, farming the same land his father refused to gamble away. That's the legacy of one stubborn man who said no when everyone around him was saying yes. If this story made you think differently about debt, about expansion, about what it really means to be successful, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now. Tell me, have you ever said no to something everyone told you that you needed and been glad you did? Or have you ever said yes to the pitch and lived to regret it? Because I promise you, you're not alone either way. Subscribe to this channel. If you want more stories like this, real stories about real people who survived by making decisions that made no sense to anyone around them at the time. Stories about farmers, business owners, families who held on when everyone else let go, and share this video, right now, with someone who's being pressured to upgrade, expand, take on debt they're not sure they can handle, with someone who's sitting across from their own Tom Aldridge and feeling the pull of a pitch that sounds too good to refuse. The dealer convinced 12 farmers to trade up. 11 years later, 9 of them had lost everything. The one who said no still owns his land, and that is the difference between following the crowd and trusting your own judgment. Thanks for watching.